বলবীর বল উন্নত মম শির, শির নেহারি আমারি নত শির ওই শিখর হিমাদ্রির। বলবীর বল মহাবিশ্বের মহাকাশ ফাড়ি, চন্দ্র সূর্য গ্রহ তারা ছাড়ি, ভুলোক দুলোক গোলক ভেদিয়া, খোদার আসন আরশ ছেদিয়া, উঠিয়াছি চির বিস্ময় আমি বিশ্ববিধাত্রীর।
This amazing poem, Bidrohi, was written by a very angry 22-year-old man in December 1921, Qazi Nazrul Islam. It heralded his arrival on the Indian political scenario as a great rebel poet. India in the 1920s was at the crossroads of its history. After senseless killings by the British at Jallianwala Bagh in 1919, Gandhi began his campaign of non-cooperation. Firebrands like Nazrul joined this movement. But when Gandhi called it off in 1922 after stray violence, the youth in Bengal felt let down. They were already under the grip of revolutionary ideology. Bengal had seen years of intense poverty, peasant exploitation, caste discrimination, and religious orthodoxy. A young Nazrul had already lived through much of these experiences, and so he wrote with passion in Bidrohi.
পানির ডমরু ত্রিশূল ধর্মরাজের দণ্ড, আমি চক্র মহাশঙ্খ, আমি প্রণব নাদ প্রচণ্ড।
Nazrul was born on 24th May 1899 in Churulia, a village in Bardhaman district, West Bengal. His was a family of qazis or judges who had migrated from Bihar to this western fringe of Bengal. His father was the imam of a mosque. Nazrul was one of several children born in poverty. He was named Dukhu Miya, the sorrowful one. Nazrul grew up amidst Hindu and Muslim ruins in his native Churulia. The ruins of a legendary Hindu king is described in one of his earliest poems, Bhagna Stup. Nazrul began studies at the Muslim elementary school, but after his father's early death, Nazrul at the age of 10 was made the village mullah and muazzin, caller for prayers at the mosque.
Allahu Akbar,
He looked after the shrine of a Muslim pir as a caretaker. Soon he was drawn into a group of traveling musicians, the Leto. He became conversant in Hindu mythology and the folk culture of Bengal while composing dramas for Leto teams. Nazrul's education was checkered, and in between he struggled hard against poverty, taking up odd jobs as a servant boy and working at a village bread factory. A good student earning tuition waivers, Nazrul decided against completing the school-level examinations. He was fascinated by colorful posters he saw plastered on walls. They carried the offer of a stint with the British Army to fight in the First World War. Nazrul joined this new regiment called the 49th Bengalis of the British Indian Army. Nazrul, however, never saw active action in battle. But in his enforced stay in Nowshera and Karachi, he continued his Persian studies which he had started in high school. Reading major Bengali newspapers, Nazrul became aware of the world developments like the Bolshevik Revolution. Nazrul now started writing in earnest. His first published piece was Boundeler Attokahini, or Autobiography of a Vagabond, in 1919 in a literary journal of liberal Bengali Muslims. Nazrul went on to publish several poems like Mukti, or Freedom, in the Bongio Musulman Shahitya Potrika. This was a periodical run by Muzaffar Ahmed. Nazrul became closely associated with this communist ideologue after his release from the army. Nazrul's writing career took off as a journalist. With Muzaffar Ahmed, he brought out the evening daily Nabojug with the support of prominent Muslim politician Fazlul Haq. His writings on political issues linked the Indian struggle with the Russian Revolution, the Irish Rebellion, and the new Turkey under Kemal Atatürk. He also focused on the plight of workers and peasants, expressing sympathy for striking workers. After several warnings from the government for its dissident views, the Nabojug was closed down in January 1921. Music now played an important part in Nazrul's life. He had received training in classical music in high school, and in Nowshera he had heard ghazal music. Nazrul soon earned fame as a singer.
It's difficult for me to cover the dimension of Nazrul's compositions. We start from national songs, songs on patriotism, then songs on religion, then songs on folk, on many varieties of folk, then on different countries and different situations, and then on animals, birds, such like, and of course human beings.
Nazrul's songs were unique compositions in Bengali, often sprinkled with Arabic and Persian words. He introduced ghazals in Bengali for the first time. In August 1922, Nazrul began publishing his own bi-weekly paper with meager resources. He called it Dhumketu or Comet. Leading literary figure Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay encouraged him to speak the truth about both adversaries and friends. Rabindranath Tagore welcomed Dhumketu as the comet which would awaken those who were still unconscious. The first issue of Dhumketu carried Nazrul's famous poem of the same name, where he declared, "And so I revolt, and so I usher in the revolution." Dhumketu was Nazrul's expression of revolt against multiple injustices which kept man in bondage. Nazrul's language of protest was a unique blend of metaphors drawn from both Islam and Hinduism. He invoked the strength of Durga as she annihilated the demon in his poem, Anundamoyir Agumane, which appeared in Dhumketu. He also sought to celebrate Shiva's cosmic dance of destruction in his poem, Pralayullash. Equally, Dhumketu sought to draw attention to the heroic tradition of Islam with articles on Muharram and Karbala, the Zamzam well at Mecca and Medina. In the very first issue of Dhumketu, he wrote that the greatest religion was humanism and stated that promoting Hindu-Muslim harmony was his foremost goal.
Hindu Musalman, Muslim tar noyon moni, Hindu tahar pran, Akshe akash mayer kole, Jano robi shoshi dole, Ek rokto buker tole, Akshe narir tan, Mora ek brinte duti kushum, Hindu Musalman.
Conservative Muslim newspapers lambasted Nazrul as a kafir, and Hindu orthodoxy socially boycotted him as an outcast.
I think it's important to recognize that the relevance of Nazrul's thinking today is confined to not so much the fact that he was rebellious, but it relates to the fact that he was rebellious on causes which are still extremely important. One of which, of course, is his rebellion against the narrow-mindedness of sectarianism, dividing people up on some one line, religion, ethnicity, or even nationality.
In November 1922, the British authorities banned Dhumketu, arrested Nazrul and sentenced him to a year's rigorous imprisonment. Nazrul made a spirited defense in a prose poem. A defiant Nazrul warned, "The music of my flute will not die simply because my flute has been confiscated. The music is not in my flute, it is in my heart." Prison could not silence Nazrul's pen. Stirring poems like Shikol Porar Chol, composed in 1924, and Srishti Shuker Ullashe, composed in 1923, were impassioned cries of a free spirit. In May 1923, Nazrul went on a hunger strike, protesting unfair conditions in jail. His hunger strike extended to 40 days, causing concern for his failing health. Tagore, in a telegram, asked him to give up the strike in the greater interest of literature. He dedicated his musical drama Boshanto, or Spring, to the fiery poet, hoping he would bring the spirit of spring to a jaded nation. Eventually, Nazrul was persuaded to give up the fast by his surrogate mother, Biroja Devi of Kumilla. Nazrul had received considerable affection from the Sengupta family of Kumilla. He was deeply drawn to Promila, the young niece of Biroja Devi. On his release from prison in December 1923, he hastened to Kumilla and proposed marriage to Promila, whom he called his Bijoyini, the victorious one.
1924 সালের এপ্রিল মাসে কাজী নজরুল ইসলামের সঙ্গে প্রমীলা সেনগুপ্তর বিবাহ হয়। কাজী নজরুল ইসলাম চাননি যে তার স্ত্রী ধর্মান্তরিতা হন, ফলে এই বিবাহকে বৈধ করার জন্য, এই ইন্টার রিলিজিয়াস ম্যারেজকে বৈধ করার জন্য একটা নতুন আইন তৈরি করা হয়। কিন্তু সেই সময় রক্ষণশীল সমাজের হিন্দু মুসলমান এরা এই বিয়েকে মেনে নিতে পারেনি, ফলে তারা এই বিয়েকে বর্জন করেছিল।
For a time, Nazrul was lost in romantic bliss. In this song, he decorates his bride and nuptial chamber with incredibly rich imagery.
জোছনার সাথে চন্দন দিয়ে মাখাবো তোমার রামধনু হতে লাল রং ছানি আলতা পরাবো আমার গানের সাচুর দিয়া তোমার বাসর রচিব প্রিয়া তোমারে ঘেরিয়া গাহিবে আমার।
An untiring advocate of gender equality, Nazrul made an inspiring plea in his poem Nari. Tear open your veil, woman, break your chains, get rid of all your marks of slavery, all your ornaments.
সামনের গান গাই আমার চোখে পুরুষ রমণী কোনো ভেদাভেদ নাই।
Savage communal riots broke out in Calcutta in 1926. The anguished voice of Nazrul cried out, "This heart is the mosque, the temple, the church. There is no temple or Kaaba greater than the heart." To ease the communal frenzy, Nazrul wrote in 1926 his stirring song Kandari Hushiyar, Helmsman Beware, hailed by Subhash Bose as the most inspiring of India's national songs.
করো পারাবার হে লঙ্ঘিতে হবে রাত্রি মিশিতে যাত্রীরা হুঁশিয়ার
In a mood of anguish, Nazrul wrote a heart-rending poem, Daridro, Poverty, in 1926.
তুমি মোরে করেছো মহান তুমি মোরে দানিয়াছো
These years saw Nazrul face great financial distress, in the midst of which a son was born. A distressed Nazrul once again turned to music as therapy. His inspiration came from his son with a unique Hindu-Muslim name, Orindam Khalid. Nazrul fondly called him his Bulbul or nightingale. In his name, he wrote his first ghazal.
বাগিচায় বুলবুলি তুই ফুল শাখাতে কৃষ্ণে আজ দল আজ তার ফুল কলিতে ঘুম টুটেনি তন্দ্রাতে বিলল
In 2 years, Nazrul was composing a series of ghazals which he contributed along with notations to journals. Dilip Kumar Roy, a celebrated musician and singer, was to vastly popularize Nazrul's songs. Nazrul's musical career received a boost in 1928 when the British-owned Gramophone Company overcame its prejudice and saw the wisdom of making a handsome offer to Nazrul to record his songs and become the music trainer. 1929 saw the peak of Nazrul's popularity as he toured Bengal and sang to welcoming audiences. He was feted in Calcutta's Albert Hall at a public function. Acharya Prafulla Chandra Rai, who presided, declared Nazrul Islam to be a rousing poet of the whole Bengali race. Subhash Chandra Bose vowed Nazrul's songs would be sung on the battlefield and on the march to prison. Decades later, on India's eastern borders, the Azad Hind Fauj of Subhash would march to Nazrul's rousing tune of Chal Chal Chal, as it participated in a Japanese offensive against the British during the Second World War. Nazrul's cup of joy drained out too quickly. In May 1930, his beloved son Bulbul died of smallpox, leaving him desolate. Although he was to have 2 more sons, the acute sense of loss remained. He immersed himself in music. For the next 12 years, he composed over 3,000 songs, surpassing the number that Tagore had composed.
Nazrul's sense of rebellion also expressed itself in his musical composition. Breaking all convention, he drew on multiple musical influences ranging from classical to folk, from the Persian ghazal tradition to South Indian music.
Many of his love songs composed in semi-classical style were unabashed statements of earthly passion, shocking at a time when Tagorean restraint and Brahmo norms of morality conditioned the literary style. Nazrul increasingly turned to spiritualism after Bulbul's death and began tantric meditation. He now wrote over 100 songs in praise of Kali, Shama Shongit, capturing the folk flavor of Kirtan music. At the same time, Nazrul sought to unravel the secret meaning in the Quran. He translated with other scholars 38 chapters or surahs of the Quran. He also undertook the translation of selections from Hafiz and Omar Khayyam. Nazrul's Islamic music had a significant liberalizing impact on tradition-bound Muslim society. In 1931, Nazrul entered the world of theatre and films and later joined Calcutta Radio as story and scriptwriter and music director. In 1939, Nazrul suffered yet another personal tragedy when his wife Promila suffered a paralytic attack which left her bedridden. Nazrul felt increasingly troubled. His wife's ailment and the war-torn world environment created a sense of extreme disquiet. In a speech in 1941, Nazrul asked with a sense of foreboding, "What if the flute plays no more? What if the power from a mysterious golden sky that had steadily inspired him to write was lost in an instant, leaving him speechless and silencing his flute?" He fearfully predicted this would not be death, but something gloomier than death. In August, on the demise of Rabindranath Tagore, Nazrul's broadcast Robi Hara, or Losing Robi, which captured his sense of being utterly bereft. In the middle of a radio broadcast in 1942, Nazrul suddenly felt the power of speech ebbing out of him, along with his mental faculties. The fiery lute had burnt itself out, and yet his time was not over. With a deep sense of foreboding, he had written his last song.
খেলা শেষ হলো, শেষ হয় নাই বেলা, কাঁদিও না, কাঁদিও না, তব তারে রেখে গেনু প্রেমানন্দ মেলা, শেষ হয় নাই বেলা।
Indeed, Nazrul's time was not over, and he was to live for another 34 years in a state that he had himself described as gloomier than death.
যদি আর বাঁশি না বাজে, আমি কবি বলে বলছি না, আমি আপনাদের ভালোবাসা পেয়েছিলাম, সেই অধিকারে বলছি, আমায় আপনারা ক্ষমা করবেন, আমায় ভুলে যাবেন, বিশ্বাস করুন।
Medical treatment in India and abroad resulted in no improvement. The fiery poet's fine mind was tragically lost. Honours poured in. Calcutta University bestowed its prestigious Jagotarini Gold Medal on Nazrul in 1945. The Indian government honoured him with the Padma Bhushan in 1960. Bangladesh, which marched towards independence in 1971, singing his inspirational song, brought him to Dhaka in 1972.
আমি প্রেম দিতে এসেছিলাম, প্রেম পেতে এসেছিলাম, সে প্রেম পেলাম না বলে আমি এই প্রেমহীন নিরস পৃথিবী থেকে নীরব অভিমানে চিরদিনের জন্য।
He was given citizenship and awarded the prestigious Medal of Gallantry, Ekushe Paduk, and declared him as the national poet of Bangladesh. Dhaka University honoured him with a second D.Litt degree. In a supreme irony, these honours were heaped on a poet whose mind had already left him.
তোমাদের পানে চাহিয়া বন্ধু আর আমি জাগিব না, কোলাহল করি সারা দিন মান, কারো ধ্যান ভাঙিব না, নিশ্চল নিশ্চুপ আপনার মনে পুড়িব একাকী গন্ধ বিধুর ধূপ।
On August 29, 1976, Nazrul passed away, his wife and a son having already predeceased him. Nazrul's voice may have been silenced forever, yet his soul-rousing message of his poems and songs echoes in the hearts of millions of Indians.
আমারে পড়িল মনে মনোজল এত দিনে কি আমারে পড়িল মনে মনোজল দিতে গেলে ফুল প্রিয় কেরালি সমাধিতে তোল